In many ways, the movie Hitch follows the classic Hollywood formula for a romance. There's a man, Hitch, and a beautiful woman, Sara, and she's very into her career, but he has to convince her that she's missing something, a relationship with him. He's slick and charming, but she's very guarded. And as a side plot, we have this kind of pansy guy, to use the name of the classic Hollywood trope, and that's Albert, who is also trying to woo another woman, Allegra, but he has no style, and he has no grace, so he has to learn from the leading man how to do it. And like in those classic Hollywood movies, masculinity and femininity are discrete, opposing qualities, which are always in direct conflict with each other. But in Hitch, that's not the whole story. There's another element to the plot. And I mean aside from the fact that Hitch is a dating coach. See, Hitch wasn't always this cool guy. In college, he was a simp. Near the start of the movie, there's a flashback sequence where we meet Hitch in college. We see him introduce himself to this girl, Cressida, and she's into him, but he comes on way too strong, which pushes her away.
Just what did I do wrong? Just tell me what I did wrong. Dude, you're doing it right now.
Hitch explains that it was in response to that rejection that he became the romance expert we see now. And I think knowing that Hitch wasn't always like this, that his cool Chad persona is an extremely deliberate performance, has some interesting implications for how he uses both masculinity and femininity to express his own identity, which is always in flux. So that's what I want to talk about today. It appears that Hitch has very carefully studied the ways that men and women behave. This helps him serve his clients, but he also uses it to his own advantage to pick up women. Hitch is, in many ways, a pickup artist, although the movie goes out of its way to show that actually he drinks his respect women juice and will only help men who are seeking long-term relationships. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but the point is, he uses this seemingly vast scientific knowledge of both men's and women's behaviors to manufacture elaborate artificial situations that will get women to pay attention to the men they otherwise wouldn't notice. Obviously, dating is always a bit of a performance, but Hitch takes it to an extreme. In the beginning montage, we see him intentionally bait a woman's dog and then hand it off to one of his clients, who then pretends that he leapt into the street to rescue it from being hit by a car. This, to me, is a huge lie to predicate an entire relationship on. It's not like lying and telling your date that your favorite director is Lars von Trier to seem edgy. I mean, can you imagine having to hide this lie? That you intentionally endangered this woman's dog and then paid a cabbie to look like he almost hit you in a heroic act of bravery for the rest of your life, so that you could ask her out in an exciting way, I guess? I don't think that would work for me, personally, but ethics aside, we can tell that these performances do work for Hitch's clients to get women's attention, because he has carefully designed them to do so. Everything about Hitch's persona is very carefully designed. He has a plan for any situation, and often when he's talking to women, it feels like he's using a line that somehow simultaneously sounds like he thought really hard about it in advance, but he also just came up with it on the spot.
And if you must drink, drink in the moments that take your breath away.
Did you just make that up?
And because everything about Hitch is a performance, he ends up moving very fluidly between performances of masculinity and femininity. After all, his job is not just to know how men should act, but also how women will respond to their actions. So when he's coaching Albert, Hitch doesn't just model how Albert should behave. He also, often, assumes the role of Allegra, Albert's love interest. There are a couple of instances where he puts on this little play for Albert's benefit, but I think the most striking is when he's helping Albert rehearse his first kiss. Albert expresses a lot of discomfort here, but Hitch immediately begins to roleplay as Allegra, and encourages Albert to copy his demonstration of bringing his face close to signal that he wants to smooch. But while Hitch has crafted intricate rituals to touch the skin of other men, it's very important for him to do so on his own terms. When Albert violates the terms of the performance by actually kissing Hitch, this is a huge problem. Hitch recoils and immediately walks out of the frame, even though this is just the logical extension of the exercise they were doing. This is because Hitch only touches other men when he is exerting control over them. We see this in a subtle way when he reassures his clients by placing his hands on their shoulders, and after Albert does this really goofy and endearing dance, Hitch smacks him in a way that says, "I know better than you, so shut up and listen." We also see this behavior in a more overt way when Hitch feels threatened by Vance, and responds by pinning him down to their table. And after he does that, he says,
"I will literally break your shit off if you ever touch me again. Okay, pumpkin?"
Vance is emasculated a couple of times over the course of this movie, including later on when Hitch's love interest, Sara, kicks him in the groin, and when he doubles over in pain, we get this sight gag of him eating the charging bull's ass. And here, in calling Vance pumpkin, Hitch is relegating him to a feminine role in order to shame him and assert dominance over him. So while the movie does all this posturing about respecting women, it is simultaneously using emasculation or feminization to moralize about the characters that do not respect women. So on that note, I want to talk a little bit about how Hitch interacts with actual women. This movie does a lot of posturing to assure the audience that even though Hitch is a glorified pickup artist, he is also definitely a good guy. He only does this work for guys that really care about pursuing long-term relationships with women. He refuses to work with Vance, a man who merely wants to sleep with a woman, and then he does this whole speech towards the end where he says,
It's because of jerks like him that I even have a job.
But we also know that due to his college heartbreak, Hitch has refused to have any long-term relationships of his own. He tells Vance,
Hit and quit it is not my thing.
But it seems like in his personal life, that is very much his thing. When we first meet Hitch in the present day, it's in a bar, where he and his brother-in-law Ben talk about how they used to gallivant around having fun before Ben got married. To show Ben what he's missing, he goes over to some attractive women and pretends to think that they're waitresses so that they'll start a conversation with him. This scene is completely insane to me. I don't think that this would actually work in real life. It just seems kind of rude and unnecessary, but apparently it's like working for her. And even though we see that he actually doesn't take these women home on this occasion, ultimately, the point of this exercise was not to get a romantic date or even to have an interesting conversation. It was to prove to himself and to Ben that he can and does do exactly what Vance does to women. And I want to be clear here. I don't think that there's anything wrong with adults having casual sex as long as both parties agree that that is the extent of the relationship. But the movie frames seeking casual sex from a woman as morally wrong, even before we learn that Vance does so under false pretenses. But unlike Vance, Hitch doesn't seem to care that much about the physical aspects of relationships. Instead, he mainly relates to women emotionally through his clients. The movie is constantly reminding us that even when he is not physically there in the room when his client is interacting with a woman, he is always present on some level as the sort of puppet master of the date. We hear his voiceover at key points in what would otherwise be an intimate moment between a man and a woman. We hear his instructions to Albert, which Albert carries out diligently. And we see Albert almost walk out of the bathroom in his underwear because he is not wearing the proverbial pants. Hitch is. Hitch is deeply familiar with his client's love interests, not just in a general sense as women, but also specifically as individuals. He knows them. And it is implied that because of his fear of rejection, he exploits his control over his clients to form what amount to parasocial bonds with these women. but it also goes deeper than that. In that same scene, where we see Albert fumbling to prepare for his first introduction with Allegra, we also get this really interesting match cut of Allegra and Hitch walking. And I think this is so interesting because at different points in this one scene, we see Hitch occupying the roles of both Albert and Allegra, just as throughout the movie, he takes on the social roles of both men and women. Hitch is almost chameleonic in his ability to move between different personas. He is at once both masculine and feminine, at once deeply invested in long-term relationships, and also a pickup artist. At once a sweet, vulnerable, awkward dork, and also a suave, graceful, pickup artist. And it becomes almost impossible to identify which of these personas is not a performance. Sure, we see his vulnerability and awkwardness come out in moments where he is caught off guard or high on Benadryl, but somehow these two feel inorganic. There are moments of pressure or an altered state from the Hitch that we know and see throughout most of the movie. Just because he was goofy in college doesn't mean that that's who he really is deep down. If his current-day personality is so far removed from that, can we really say which is the real Hitch? Throughout the movie, there is only one woman that consistently has actual direct interactions with Hitch, and that's his love interest, Sara. Their first interaction is a lot like Hitch's earlier interaction with the two women that he pretended were waitresses. He's making a show of putting down another man, putting a hand on his shoulder, pretending he's Sara's husband, and then just using a lot of corny lines. They both speak in hypotheticals because they're both interested in establishing a certain level of emotional distance. And it's not entirely clear why Hitch is interested beyond the reasons that he was interested in the two women earlier. Sara is a beautiful woman who presents a challenge because she is not impressed by Hitch's performance. But nevertheless, despite a few impediments which actually endear him to Sara, Hitch continues to maintain this emotional distance up until the point where he learns from Allegra that some women actually like it when men behave in ways that might be considered awkward or embarrassing or, human. And at this point, he fully leans into a performance of vulnerability. And I think that makes the ending, where Hitch finally drops the Chad persona and spills his heart out to Sara, a little disturbing. Everything we know about Hitch is that he is an expert in the art of fabrication. He knows what women want to hear, and he will go to any lengths, up to and including pet kidnapping, to let them hear it. So, how do we know if this is the genuine article or just another performance? Well, we don't. It's up to us to decide whether Hitch has really emotionally healed, or he's just really good at his job. So thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing. I try to post a new video like this one every other week, and if you have any thoughts on Hitch, please let me know in the comments. I think this movie is really like a gold mine for talking about different types of identity, and I've really only scratched the surface here, so definitely interested in talking more about Hitch. Okay, bye!